Hello and welcome everyone to this channel. My name is Janet. I'm working through the King James's Bible. Today I am in the book of Ezra and I will be covering the final chapters of this book today. So I'm starting at chapter 7 and working all the way through to chapter 10. So we've got quite a few to cover today. And if you're ready, I'm ready, so we will get started. So in chapter 7 we are starting with the genealogy of Ezra. We haven't really heard much about this man of God until now. Now his presence is becoming known. So chapter 7 starts during the reign of King Artaxerxes, who is the king of Persia. And I won't be mentioning that name anymore because my pronunciations of these really difficult names is not my strong spot. So I will just refer to him as King A. So during his reign we meet the man himself, Ezra. He is a scribe who is a descendant of Aaron, the high priest, remember, who was with Moses right at the very beginning, leading those Israelites out of Egypt. Now Ezra comes up from Babylon after some have already returned from being captive in Babylon and have already gone to Jerusalem and Judah. Ezra is kind of like the second lot to go up. It says he is a skilled scribe in the law of Moses, what Moses had written down from God. He's skilled in it. So he is kind of like we would class a lawyer today. And it says that the king of Persia was very generous to Ezra because he was a scribe of God. And he came up to Jerusalem with other priests and Levites in the 7th year of King A's reign. So it was on the 5th month that he arrives, and he set off on his journey on the 1st day of the 1st month. So it took a good 5 months to get there. It wasn't a short journey to get to Jerusalem from the king of Persia's land. And he was sent up specifically by the king to teach God's laws, statutes and ordinances to the Jerusalem and Judah people. Now the king of Persia, he sends up with Ezra helpers, a copy of God's law and gifts for the temple, which is all expressed in a letter specifically written to Ezra by the king. And he's to gather information for the king and other counselors around him, 7 others. He also details exactly what is to be done with the treasury funds that is to be given to him. He wants him to buy bulls and rams and lambs, grain offerings and drink offerings to give to the Lord. Also, he details the articles for service that he wants to give, and also whatever Ezra needs up to a limit. Now you can see the full details of all of this if you check the link under this video for chapter 7 and look at verses 17 to 22. Now why, you might ask, is the king of Persia doing all of this? Well, it is for doing good will, really. He has that presence of God within him and he wants to keep his people safe from God's wrath. The king also gives Ezra authority to both ensure all God's laws are, followed, and to set up magistrates and judges to judge the people in Judah and Jerusalem. And those who fail to keep God's laws, he said, are to be killed or banished or confiscated of goods or given a prison sentence. Ezra then gives thanks to the king and God for placing him in this position and that he will honour God's laws. And this closes our first chapter for today, chapter 7. Now chapter 8 starts with a list of the families who came to Jerusalem with Ezra during King A's of Persia's reign. Now if you want to see this full list, because I'm not going to read it here, you will check out the link under this video if you like for chapter 8 and check out verses 1 to 14. Now there was approximately 6,000 to 7,000 people that went with Ezra up to Jerusalem. Now Ezra notes on seeing this huge group that there's no Levites among them. Now they are the temple workers, they are the people that help God's work, that's who God appointed. So he calls forth to the king to say, we need to get some Levites involved. So he sends out this message to them. Now the Levite Sherebiah, he responds to this call and he brought up a group of Levites with him, so they join the group with Ezra. Ezra then calls for all of them to have a fast at the river Ahava. This is to humble themselves before God and also to protect themselves from any enemies during this long journey up to Jerusalem. He didn't want to get the king to have an escort. He wanted to put his trust in God. So he's having this fast with the people to ensure, God You connect with us, you keep us safe, and take us safely to Jerusalem. Ezra then separates the Levite leaders into 12 different leaders, and then he gives each of them a portion of the gold and silver that was given by the king and some of the articles that are to be taken for the temple of God. So the gold and silver is weighed, so they all know exactly how much each one has got, and it's their responsibility to keep them safe as they journey up to Jerusalem. Then after 12 days they depart from the river Ahava. And so they journey up to Jerusalem and they are kept safe by God. And when they arrive in Jerusalem, they stay there for 3 days. Then all of the gold and silver is weighed that the Levites had been carrying with them, and they are carefully accounted for so that they know nobody has taken anything that they shouldn't. And also they give the articles as well for God's temple. They then offer burnt offerings to the Lord, including 12 bulls, 96 rams, 77 lambs, 12 male goats, and these are all for the sin offerings. Then they announce why they are here and that Ezra is here by the king to make sure that the laws of God are adhered to. They are also to set up magistrates and judges, and he is here to teach the law so that they will follow it. So the people all give their support to this, and this is where we close chapter 8. So chapter 9 starts once Ezra has now arrived in Jerusalem, he's delivered the goods and he's given the orders of the king to the people. That is when some of the people come up to him and tell him about the abominations that have been happening in Jerusalem and Judah. They tell him that some of the people have mixed with other nations, so some of the Canaanites, the Moabites, etc., and they've intermingled, they've married, so they've mixed their seed, which is an abomination in God's law. And a lot of this is down to the leaders because they have allowed it to happen. Ezra then describes in this chapter being absolutely astonished at what has become of the Jerusalem and Judah people already. So he rips off his clothes, he even pulls out some of his hair from his beard and his head. And others around him who were appalled as well as what has happened to the people, they sat with him. And they stay there until the evening, and this is just like a giving up to the Lord, a humbling of themselves, because they are fearing now God's wrath for what the Israelites had done. And he says, we have been guilty, and he lists off the past of what they've done, all of these things, and they've been put into exile, says, and how God has still forgiven them. He's even allowed them to come back to this promised land after all of those abominations that they'd done during that reign, that time in the promised land. And then he knows that God's worked through the king of Persia to allow them to come here, to be here for another time, another chance, another opportunity. And he says we are here to revive, to repair, and to rebuild Judah and Jerusalem. And Ezra is concerned that the people here are testing God's mercy. And he pleads with God for the current abomination that's happened, and he's humbling himself and the people, saying, not one of us can stand before you, Lord, for what, where we stand right now. And this is where we end chapter 9, where we're in this very humbling place for God to please have mercy on them for this transgression already, as they are trying to start a new generation, a new Israel. So as we open chapter 10, we have Ezra praying and weeping in front of God for the current position that the Israelites are in, and other people come around. So this is women and men and children, and they also pray and weep before God. Now Shechaniah, who is from one of the families that came up with Ezra, speaks to him. And he says, yes, we have gone against God, but there is hope. Let's make a covenant with God. He says, let's put away these pagan wives from our community, so get them out of the community. So that's what he wants him to do, make this covenant with God. Let's clean out the camp so that we're back into a holy place again. And he asks Ezra, rise up, this is your responsibility, we are with you, have courage, let's get this job done. So Ezra arises and he makes a proclamation with the priests and the Levites to make an oath to carry out this covenant. So a proclamation is sent out to all of Jerusalem and Judah, and it's for them to return to Jerusalem in 3 days' time. And if they don't return in 3 days, then they will lose their property and they will be banished from the land. So within 3 days, all of the people gather in Jerusalem in front of Ezra, and he says to them, "We have married into foreign nations and have brought guilt upon Israel. We must honour our God and God's laws. You must now separate yourself from these foreigners, and the foreigner wives must be banished from this land." And the assembly agree that they should do as Ezra is telling them. And they did this until God's wrath was eased. Now only Jonathan, it says, son of Asiel, and Jahaziah, son of Tikvah, opposed this. I guess they had closeness with their families or whatever it was, and they didn't want to do it. So this process of cleaning out the foreigners from their land took a long time. There was a lot of questioning, and it took over 3 months to eventually clear everyone out. And then this chapter ends with a total list of those found guilty. So you can check out the link under this video for chapter 10, and you're looking at verses 18 right through to 44. So you can see quite a big list of names of those guilty. This then closes our final chapter for today, chapter 10. And it finishes the book of Ezra. So that's it for this book. We will be moving on in the next video to the book of Nehemiah. So we'll be reading that next. Thank you for your time, and I'll be back again soon. Take care now. Bye.